A tycoon dies, a TV network is shut down, and the health secretary says the curve has flattened. These are among the top stories that we will discuss today, and this is the Newsroom Huddle. I'm Julius Maraveles.
I'm Hannah Papasin.
I'm Gabby Lacson.
I'm Austin Salameda.
Do kaluyaw.
Kulang rendang. Or nasobrahan sa rendang.
Now, Danding Kuangko was 85 when he died several weeks ago. The former ambassador, chairman of San Miguel Corporation, and the crony of former President Ferdinand Marcos is all but remembered now. Meanwhile, Secretary Francisco Duque III says the curve, he was referring to the cases of COVID in the Philippines, has already flattened. Meanwhile, a congressional committee decides not to renew the franchise of ABS-CBN. Locally, cases continue to climb. LSIs, or locally stranded individuals, very simply returning negrenses, and overseas foreign workers are being blamed for the rise. Now, what do we see in the trend so far? Let's talk about COVID first.
Oh, the trend so far is that starting sa May, you remember, starting sa first week of May, there is already a rise in the number of cases, sometimes by increments of 5, 10, and then lately, siguro mga 2 weeks ago lang, or that I think that was a week ago, there was a record high, 21 cases.
In a single day?
In a single day. And then, nagka-double digits na. Sang una, in 1 week nga makalima kaka-cases, taas na siya katama. Subong niya in a single day, ang Negros Occidental has 21 cases. Now, ang trend nag-start siya first week of May because remember, this was the time when Duterte told all the LGUs, especially ang DOH, for example, LGUs and other government agencies, like ang DOH, DILG, I think, included, and the Department of Transport, nambalan niya nga within 1 week kinahanglan ipapulio na ni ang mga locally stranded individuals kag ang mga repatriated ng OFW sa ilang mga home provinces because they are already stranded sa mga ports like sa NAIA and sa iban ng mga terminals. A day after Duterte gave that directive, the DILG also gave a similar directive, but this time instead of a week gintagaan niya lang ang mga LGUs 5 days. So that's why there's madness practically sa mga ports like sa Tabuelan, and then nagasaka ang cases. Another thing na nakita ko sa pattern sa pag-rise ng cases is because mayari nakita diri sa mga molecular labs nga naga-test na. So instead of makadto ka sa Cebu or sa Manila in order to get the results, mayari na din sa Trisita, Landoni, kag sa CLMMRH. So that's why nga mas dasig man ang turnaround sa mga results. Although may mga pending pa subong by siguro 1,000.
Austin Salameda is our medical correspondent. He started writing for DNX since the lockdowns began. He is a pre-PGI, how do you call it actually? Postgraduate intern and internship or pre-internship. Basta medical correspondent. Anyhow, si Doc Salameda is, of course, an experienced writer. By now, he was mainly responsible for our researches on COVID and other stuff. Gabriel Christian Lacson, on the other hand, si Gabby, is our political correspondent and columnist at the same time. He is a incoming second year law student at the University of St. LaSalle. Let's talk about this. Basically, what are your impressions about COVID? Let's take a look at this from the view of a medical practitioner and you as medical correspondent, Doc. What do you see?
So, okay. Gin-discuss ni Miss Hannah ang gakatabo sa aton di locally Mostly ang ako nga gina-research is on the national bla nga level sang numbers. So normally ang trend nga ako nga gina-expect nga makita is actually ma-increase man gid sa dapat. The problem is ang aton nga increases ya is nang hindi siya bala it's not expected ya bala kay dapat ya bala nga aton nga increase ya bala is expected to be amuni ang increase niya for a day and then amo naman ni galing kaya nga to niya ang numbers ta like for example for the deaths mira ta 20 for this day and then 5 the next day and then 18 duga mo na siya blow na and then overall ang numbers ta diyon is ang overall naman niya for the cases the active cases it's increasing naman which is supposed to be normal kay ga-increase na nga aton nga capacity for testing and nag-open pag ita nag-ease ta sa aton nga lockdowns and quarantines so it's supposed to rise man gid dapat ang problem sina is ang deaths ta ga rise man active cases ga rise man which means wala ta gina-contain ang kung ano ang aton nga kung ano nga aton bi nga nga mga policies ng ginhimo for containing this is for me it's not really working bulahaw kaya it's supposed to be mataas lang ang cases but the active cases hindi siya ma-steady siya or manubo ang deaths manubo man ang muna siya and the doubling time although the doubling time ang doubling time tani nga ginatawag amo ni siya ang isa ka basis kung gina-flatten ta ang curve with what Duque said nga ga-flatten ta ang curve I think amo ni sang ginbasihan ang aton nga doubling time actually nagnami what I mean is by nagnami ang doubling time mo is dapat madako kay ang doubling time sang COVID per sabi if ang doubling time mo is 3 days in 3 days ma-double ang number so from 100 ma 200 siya in 3 days so kung ang doubling time mo will become 7 so in 7 days pa sa ma 200 so ang ginbasihan for me ang ginbasihan ni Duque isa muna actually nga itong doubling time naman gid naglapad pero it's not safe to say nga we have flattened the curve when ang aton nya active cases is taas gid Japon.
All right, Doc, I'll go to that later.
Okay,
Let's
okay,
talk
sige.
about the nuancing of the story. Example, doubling time, medyo complicated in concept ni. But dugay-dugay balikan ta na. Now, let's talk about policy. The policy is you should send all OFWs and locally stranded individuals home from Manila, Cebu, kundiin pa da. What do you think? Anong impressions mo about this policy, Gab? Because
Well, that's a very complicated policy to actually thresh out because what is highly sought after here is actually coordination with your local government and where are you going to put the OFWs and the LSIs when they come home. Are they eligible for home quarantine? Is it safe to do home quarantine? And on the part of the entire machinery of the government, we can actually see that sometimes our effort is really falling short during these. Our efforts are really falling short in meaning to address the situation of the return of the OFWs and LSIs because some are going home without the test, some are going home too soon, and then they come out positive a few days later. So there's a lot of oversight going on right now.
okay, now I'll go back to that point. So meaning what you see is that the policy was announced, but the preparations were not done?
Where it was, I would say, at the most politely, a bit haphazard.
Haphazard in Ilonggo is sinumbali. Hingga sinumbali.
I see, yes.
So, does it follow that there was actually a lack of preparation in that case?
I think
In-
pwede tama take example ng certain nga mga OFWs or people nga may mga OFW man blang nga mga relatives
Aha.
na gapamangkot pa sila ya sa aton kung kisa kung ano ang ilang nga himuon,
Mhm.
kung ano ang sitwasyon or ano ang policies bala nga gina-apply nga hindi na actually dapat aton nga obra dapat ginahambal na sila amo ni sa ang matabo amo ni sa ang mano, pero kay siyempre kung kita pamangkoton ga ano man lang ta kunan ga pamaga ginahibalo ta man lang kuno ang policies bala sa ginimo sa mga pag-return sa mga mga OFWs sila may iban sa ila nga wala man kabalo kung anong ilang nga himuon gapamangkot sila i-test sila or ma-quarantine sila dapat nga mamo na bla. So I think it's an indication nga medyo wala sila na inform sang mga policies nga
True.
dapat nila sundon.
But if you look at the pronouncements of some local officials, for example, diri sa Bacolod, one problem they face actually is what they say as the lack of coordination. A clear example, according to Councilor Israel Salanga, is may mabalik nga OFWs. Abi, tonight, they will be informed only on the day of the arrival. So, I don't know kung di na nag-figure in, no? Haphazard preparations. But then, if you're talking about policy, dapat oriented ng national agencies. And the LGUs should have been made aware earlier about this. But what are your impressions? What do you think?
What is basically what we see happening is really I would say the pitfalls and the shortcomings of our present unitary system, wherein it's all based sa top, it's a top-down view instead of looking at the bottom-up view, wherein the citizens and their localities can be, and their individual sentiments and the nuancing, we like to use the word nuancing of the region, where that is not really being consulted and sought after by the national government. And so, because of this unitary system, we're facing a lot of problems because the government in Manila just sort of sees it from their perspective over there, and that is detrimental, in fact, to the coordination between the LGUs and between the national government, because they could say one thing and the reality on the ground is actually very different from what they're saying it is there in Manila. Like, for example, last night or 2 nights ago, when the national government said, based on what's happening in Bacolod, we will revert back to general community quarantine. When in fact, the mayor of the city made an appeal that let's just stay with modified general community quarantine, because that's how the situation is playing out on the ground right now in terms of cases.
But does this lack of preparations actually contribute to the increase, or does it have a direct effect on rising cases, for example? What do you think, Doc?
Of course, lack of preparation will increase. I'll just make an example na lang. If a person with COVID is one of the OFWs, stuck there sa mga waiting areas nila, gin-assign sila sang LGUs, then that's a petri dish now spread. Biskan pa ang preparation, if may lack lang gida with one person lang gid nga wala na inform kung anong iya nga himuon dapat, pwede na siya ka And amo pag ang problem with testing, they say may ara kuno mga OFWs nga may mga OFWs kuno nga wala na test, may ara man nga na test. Ang results nila, is it given, is it prioritized? Makuha na nila dayon or makapuli na sila kag makapuli na sila kamo paya pag pag receive nila sang ilang results nga positive sila gali. That's a problem, and that will really increase the cases. Biskan hindi pa ma-record, that will surely increase the cases.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right. But then again, as they say, we cannot expect the numbers to drop drastically because it's like a case of, I'll give you an example. In the 1990s, before the women's desk of the National Police was put up, there was low reporting of rape cases. But when the women's desks were formed, there seemed to be an increase in the cases of rape. But if you do a nuanced examination of the story, it turns out that reporting has increased. So I don't know if what we are seeing is actually a rapid spread of the virus or faster results of RT-PCR tests. I don't know. Doka chicken and egg na question eh.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we continue to become bothered about it. Wala ta kabalo kung may local transmission ta subong. Very difficult, very difficult.
I think for me na lang the safest nga we can do is to assume nga may ara ta. Kay what is the point bala nga mga ambal ka wala ta sang, although pwede na wala ta tuod sang local transmission, pero that doesn't mean nga aton nga precautions bala i lower ta na sa amo nga standard. I think that's one of the problems bala with making bala policies bala kay we tend to make policies bala in a spectrum, like amo lang ning aton nga policy kay amo ni sang list nga hazards nga para sa amo ni nga para sa amo ni nga level, then amo pa pag change ta sa aton nga policy mag-amo ni ang level instead of assuming na lang nga daan nga COVID has this kind of spectrum nga hazard kag ang aton nga preparation isa mo nin dapat ka
But then you're talking about short-sightedness in preparation. You don't prepare for the worst case scenario in that situation. Do you think the government fell short of preparing for the COVID pandemic?
As a whole, ang mahambal Widya for me is yes, they really fell short. Biskan sa sugod pa lang, as simple as closing borders, it was late gin-implement.
You're talking about local or national governments?
Sa national government.
National. Uh-huh.
Kaya anyway, the policies of the national government will waterfall down and affect the local naton nga
And that is the first sad news, actually, the continued rising of COVID cases in Negros Occidental and Bacolod City. And just this afternoon, there's another sad news. Our fellow workers at ABS-CBN Bacolod, they posted messages on Facebook. They're going to close by end of August. So, meaning wala na trabaho ang 81 employees in Bacolod City under ABS-CBN. Okay. Now, this goes back to the decision of the House Committee on Legislative Franchises not to renew for another 25 years the franchise of the Lopez-owned network. Now, this is an issue against Malacanang because critics say it was the president who actually wanted to close ABS-CBN. Would that be a fair commentary?
If we look at the actions happening, the actions of Malacanang, we can see that from a strategic point of view, they could potentially view, I mean, or they have viewed rather, ABS-CBN, which is owned by a family adverse to their interests, as a potential political threat on the radar. So, ka-very crafty man gid sang mga tao there in Malacanang because they found a loophole in the constitution to force ABS-CBN off the air, which is the granting of a congressional franchise, which means that before you get a franchise to broadcast your programs on the air, you have to go through Congress. And now that brings us to a
Unfortunately,
yes.
ang expiration of the ABS-CBN franchise happened under Duterte.
A president who did not, in the lightest terms, he did not appreciate their programming or their view of the world, actually.
Or in the words of millennials, hindi sila close.
Yes, hindi gid sila close. Tsakto gina. And what we're seeing right now about this whole Congress moving with the blessing or without the blessing of the president, those two conflicting narratives, let's boil this down to a fundamental reality happening in our current system, which
Stripped
is
of all the emotions.
yes,
stripped of all the
without
emotions.
without whining or
But of course, we understand the sentiments
of course,
the 81
of
employees
of course,
in Bacolod City who are about to lose their
the workers are
jobs.
very important, but
It is.
anyway,
They are.
reverting back to this discussion on a fundamental flaw in our political system, we have what we call the presidential bandwagon, or in one sentence, whatever Malacanang says goes, especially amongst the voting patterns and the interests of the lower house, because that's where they get their money, that's where they get their budget, that's where they get their pork barrel. So they have to toe the line in case they want their districts to improve, for budget to come to their respective offices. And unfortunately, that presidential bandwagon has really exposed a deficit of democracy and republicanism here in the Philippines that has prevented ideologically cohesive political parties from forming, so to speak, in this whole contemporaneous political structure that we have right now. And ABS-CBN, along with this lopsided vote against them, ang 70 versus 11, that is a huge symptom of this presidential bandwagon concept. That's an example, I mean.
But even if we say that we did shift to a federal parliamentary form of government, would that be an assurance that ABS-CBN would have continued to operate?
Here's something that I need not leave out of this whole concept. It is the concept of the freedom for multinationals and international corporations to freely invest and compete here in the Philippines. That is the openness to FDI aspect, which is contrary to what we have now.
And that is one issue
our
against
constitution.
ABS-CBN actually, and
Yes.
Rappler, because they had PDRs,
Yes.
Philippine Depositary Receipts.
Oh, yes.
Too complicated to explain,
Mhm.
but in very simple terms, it was presumed that they had foreign investments.
Yes,
Ano?
that is correct. Now, if, for example, we were to liberalize the economy, which I hope would happen in our lifetimes, ABS-CBN, Rappler, and all these other news sources, GMA7, they would have more competition on the airwaves. And that would actually benefit the Filipino people because they would have more sources of information to filter their news from, to get their news from, in fact. And it following the best practices of other countries with an open FDI regime with an economy that is liberalized, then it was very highly possible nga mas hapos gid ya ang renewal of the franchise of ABS-CBN and of any other of these broadcasting companies.
If this were a disease, I mean, if you look at the issue, what do you think? What do you think is the cause of all this?
First, Gidya, in a medical perspective, with the shutting down of ABS-CBN, the first question really I want to ask everyone is, what benefit would it be to the common people in relationship to the current pandemic, that's COVID-19? How will the shutting down of ABS-CBN actually benefit the people? Okay, for me, if ibutang ta ang narrative nga ABS-CBN really needs to shut down because of whatever reason man be, I think for a public health bilang a perspective, the government should use everything they can, including ABS-CBN, to aid man bala in the pandemic at this time. Kay shutting down ABS-CBN will mean less information dissemination para sa mga common folk nga ang ila ginakuan is ABS-CBN only. And sa amuna, it could be a factor of the COVID-19 nga pandemic to even worsen.
But ma-devil's advocate ko, because have we actually seen empirical data saying that without ABS-CBN, this X percentage would lose access to information? Or is it false to say that most of the people rely on ABS-CBN? Because perhaps it could even be AM radio. Diba? Kiti kadamo sa nag-i-star sa mga far-flung areas who are actually dependent on AM radio for information.
That's true.
And then who knows? Without ABS-CBN, pila ka percent actually ang mawadaan sang direct access to information? If we are to be nuanced about the discussion about this, because as they say, the devil is always in the details. And we are the devils. I don't know. How should we even begin to understand this issue? I mean, the danger always is the oversimplification and the overcomplication of an issue. If you overcomplicate, ting panawag sina analysis paralysis mo. Analyze paralyze. If you oversimplify, that would become a mimish thing.
Correct.
Daw gin-atomize ta nga. I mean, I have the deepest respect for ABS-CBN reporters diri sa Bacolod. A lot of them are friends actually. Full disclosure, dutayan lang ko mag-ABS-CBN kung wala ko na stroke. But then it does not mean that I am angry at ABS-CBN. We are friends, Miss Hannah and I are friends with a lot of them. Sino mga friends nila?
Si Yasmin, of course.
Yasmin, Mark
Pascual
Gabriel Salanga, and of course you have Martigo,
Barbara, Ryan, sa una.
pati si Miss
Si
Ruby
Leilani.
Ore. Lots of them. So, my point here is that how should we begin to understand and look at this issue? Because whether we like it or not, subong amo ni ang kontrobersyal mo. And then one question actually, a big question I think is, a lot of people are equating ABS-CBN with the shows. Diba? It's Provinciano, it's Vice Ganda. I mean, some people actually sympathize with ABS-CBN because Cardo Dalisay, in the form of, who's that? Ang artista?
Si Coco Martin.
Coco Martin tells people nga without ABS-CBN, And then nangaki gani siya, no? But pardon me, I will sympathize with Yasmin Pascual Dormido but not with Coco Martin,
With the workers.
with the workers. Although si Coco Martin is also a worker, a highly paid one, ugaling. But, I mean, what I don't like with the handling sometimes, I'll be frank with you, is this. ABS-CBN, for me, is mainly a news and public affairs station. I watch ABS-CBN for the news. And in the past, for its current affairs programs like Correspondence with Ed Lingao, Patrick Paes, and kung sino pa Dong Puno also, sa una sa ABS-CBN. So, honestly, I don't watch Provinciano. But then again, that's entertainment for the masses. What I'm trying to say is, paano tanitulukon man? Kung balatian, how should we begin to examine the symptoms, no?
I think ang isa ka problem ni with people is perspective. Some people view ABS-CBN as parts lang nila, like their shows only, and disregard the news. Some people naman ng the opposite naman. They view ABS-CBN as the news they come up with, the work, and disregard the entertainment parts. So when you ask common people their verdict about the shutdown of ABS-CBN, some would have siya ng do ka only part lang bla of the judgment, like gusto ko ma-shutdown ng ABS-CBN kay wala pulos ang ila ginapagawa nga mga teleserye, mga amo lang ng ilang extent sang ilang reason of shutting down the network, which is actually dapat itanawon mo sa as a whole muna sa ang implications. Muna sa ang ako nya question is, overall, the shutting down of ABS-CBN, ano ang benefits nga makuha ta in the pandemic sa tanan nga aspects sang pag-shutdown sang network, may it be the news they bring, the entertainment they bring, ang mga workforces nila, ang mga work sa ilaman, everything, do ka mo na abla. You take it as a whole. Because that's a problem with people. So kung i-apply mo man in medical practice, you can't actually diagnose something with just one symptom. You have to check everything else. Okay, although pwede mayara na, syempre makapakot-bakot ka man gid symptom ma-diagnose mo muna sa isa lang ka pag-ubo-ubo or pagpamati mo sa stethoscope na pwede ka ka-diagnose, pero hindi ka maka-confirm nga amo gina siya unless i-check mo ang tanan nga factors for a disease. So I think it also applies to the shutting down of ABS-CBN. Sir.
I think ang danger diri subong is nagaswing siya both sides extreme eh. May ara nga romanticize na sa ABS because whether you like it or not, ABS-CBN has become part of their culture, part of their life. I mean, ako sa natubuhan ko buot to, the mga shows that I've been watching are either GMA and ABS eh. And ang Itbulaga sa una na dumduman ko, it's with ABS-CBN for a long time before nag-transfer siya, no? Then there's student canteen. So kadamo gito sa mga shows ng ABS-CBN that I ended up loving. But again, there's also a swing na ginaromanticize mong ABS and then you forget the accountability nga, it's big corporate media. And then and it's an open secret, the way they treat ang ilang mga workers. For example, it's been an open secret sa media industry. ABS-CBN has been also known to slant and very, I'm not saying I'm tolerating it, pero it's very understandable nga may slant magid sila towards a certain political family because this political family gave them back their let's say ang ilang right balik nga magpalayag, no? So nalimtan isang tawo abi nilang ABS is it's the model corporation. Kay gaswing sila gaswing sila towards ABS is really good, ABS is our savior, ginormanticize na bala sa ABS-CBN kag na limtan na ang flaws na ABS-CBN. On the other end,
and exactly that is the problem. There are those who romanticize. There are those who actually demonize.
Yeah, on the other
ABS.
end, there's the other end naman nga muna hindi sambal ni Sir Julius, nga gina-demonize naman ang ABS, nga nalimtan naman nga there are also political interests at play. Hambal sila nga palace has nothing to do with it. So, wala na bala ang nuansing kagang gray areas. Ano ang na-invest ng ABS throughout the years? Nga amo niyang image niya subong sa tao. Because whether we like it or not, the fact that ABS, GMA, and the top big networks are actually fighting for ratings, it's because it's not for the service of the Filipino people. It's the service of, profits. Ratings.
Duterte fascista, ibagsak! And that is the call now, actually.
Yes.
Now we go to that political question. Can the ABS-CBN issue become a flashpoint for those who want to oust Duterte via people power? So we're going to talk about democracy now. Because to some, ousting a president is direct democracy. And it is good. Diba? So, can the president fall because of this issue?
What people seem to forget about this whole ousting narrative, which has been going on for pila na ka years. You had the coup d'etats against Cory, you had EDSA 2 against Joseph Estrada, you had the coup d'etat attempts against GMA. This has been going on for some time. And what we need to remember is that we are a nation, we are a country of countries, we are a nation, we are a country of laws and not of men.
Or we are actually a country of tribes. Tribes.
Tribes.
Tribes.
Tribes.
Yes,
Tribes.
yes. That is correct.
Eh, wala? I mean, well, if you ask, who's that historian? An anarchy of
Alfred
families.
W. McCoy.
Alfred W. McCoy. So the Philippines is actually an anarchy of
Families.
families. And one of those families is actually the Lopez
Lopez.
The
clan.
Lopezes.
And McCoy wrote a very extensive description.
A very
About that
nice
plan.
chapter on that, on the interests of the Lopez family.
Of
Very
course,
good
nice
chapter.
depends on where you look at it.
Oh, yes.
Okay, but political question. Do you think the president will fall on this issue?
It's important to remember that we are a nation of laws and not of men, and that we are a constitutional democracy upholding the rule of law. So, and if we've
Uyatay anay kamot,
noticed,
uyatay anay kamot, uyatay
and
anay
if
kamot.
we,
Uyatay anay kamot.
and if we've noticed,
Magkaisa.
Mama na sila karon nga ginamak to si Edsa, okay?
No, but there is that nostalgia and
Yeah, I
sense of
Ay,
romanticism
nostalgia.
Yes, I think there is.
in ousting a
abi
president.
nila 1972 o ko 1986
1986
naman
pa.
subong, my goodness.
I
But wait, we are not pro-Marcos loyalists.
Yes, yes,
Austin
of
is not
course.
one. Austin is a Dota loyalist. You are a Dota
He's a
loyalist,
great
right?
I'm
gamer.
a Jablo loyalist.
Jab- But we are not Marcos loyalists.
Ay, sure as hell ako, my goodness.
No. Well, okay, let's go back. I'm sorry.
Of course, of course.
I'm sorry, I intervened.
Mayo na.
So, we actually think, most of us think that ousting a president is healthy for us. But is it?
It's not healthy for democracy.
Why
pare.
so?
Because it shreds the Constitution. It throws the Constitution, which admittedly is flaws, but it still is the binding force right now. It is still promulgated into law right now. It is still the law of the land. It puts the Constitution into a paper shredder and says, this is not the law. We are the law. Our feelings, our sentiments have become the law. And that's a very dangerous, that's a danger that presents a grave danger against constitutional democracy, wherein under our admittedly flawed system, the president has that right. He was given that right by the people on the 9th of May 2016 to enter office and serve as president for the next 6 years. And we may not like him. We may dislike his team. We may really not like his pronouncements, but by virtue of the operation of our constitutional democracy, he is entitled to sit as president until the 30th of June 2022.
But what do you think of this, Doc? Kamo, you are children of postmodernism. Identity politics nowadays. And on social media, it is emotion that prevails.
Prevails.
Facts become
Secondary.
Actually, we now live in a period where facts are second-class citizens.
What a tragedy.
I don't know. But remember, we are in the information age.
Yes.
We are in the information age. But what do you think? But tuod na nga gadota ka?
Yes,
Tugi
actually.
seryoso.
Yes,
Mayon
actually,
ang
pero change na ko, change na ang ako niya gaming
Habit.
habits.
Ano na subong?
Kisa-kisa na lang magbalik.
Okay.
Just a few
You see,
games na lang.
he is a serious medical correspondent of DNX. All right. I'm sorry, Doc. But, I mean, for you, for people like your age, how do you actually look at these things? Democracy, people power. Do you even think about those things?
I think for me, I have my own personal mga with may premier ako yung personal nga biases and opinions with regard to democracy, people power and all. Pero based on observation na lang with sa akon man nga demographic, there is really I consider it a disease man bla ang romanticizing revolt and people power man. And in the end,
Although, don't get me wrong, there was a time that I did actually romanticize.
Guilty man ko na.
and in the end, when this same demographic gets what they want, they don't know what to do with it. Luka mo na bla.
He has a point. He has a point.
It's like the Joker in Batman, huh? Dark Knight saying, the problem sometimes is if a dog runs after a car and he catches the car, ang next nga question sang what shall I do with it? With the car? Do amo na?
Kay it also applies with both sides if you consider identity politics as having two sides So these sides follow an ideology. So they follow this ideology. Sometimes wala sila kabalo kung ano ang end sini. Maybe they know some of the means on how to succeed this kind of ideology. Pero by the time nga kadto na sila sa end, what then? Ano ay hanang matabo? Amo na sa I think ang isa ko ka problem with amo na siya with revolts in the concept of revolution here in the Philippines is because once magprotesta ka on something and then it works, sometimes it gets replaced by something worse.
And sometimes revolts are like sex.
Okay.
Yeah,
How so?
seriously,
Okay.
because the question is always what to do the day after. What should you do the day after? Di ba? May fling ka last night. Pagbugtaw mo, tupad mo. Ang question, ano muna siya? Di ba? It's always the day after. Skip.
Second round, another revolution.
He spoke about something interesting as to how revolutions, revolts, and people power work. And if we look at the historical perspective of both EDSA 1 and EDSA 2, we can find that a key component to their success was a sort of approval by the United States of America, which is the imperial hegemon at that time of those revolts.
But wait, look. EDSA 1, there was Radio Bandido, which
Yes.
was actually Radio Veritas.
Yes.
EDSA 2, there was ANC,
Yep.
the ABS-CBN news channel, which played a very crucial role in the ouster movement of Estrada.
Yes.
But then again, of course, we have the bête noire, the black hand of the CIA. Langley.
Hey, Langley. It's actually interesting to look at this perspective because it shows you that sometimes, no, in fact, most of the time, Philippine politics can prove and can remain the stomping ground of these powers, of these really large hegemonic powers in protecting or promoting their interests here in the Republic of the Philippines. And to me, that is what happened to EDSA 1 and EDSA 2. And it also looks as if that if anybody wants a revolution or people power to succeed in the future, they need to look for support from the hegemonic powers that be in the geopolitical stage.
Okay. It's the imperialismo.
Imperialismo.
And then as we used to chant in the streets, imperialismo ibagsak. Dugay, aral ng pulis. Mas gathering ka mo, ha? Hindi, sir, artist kami, ha? Alright. Now, but the prognosis is, let's say there's an ouster movement against the president. Would it succeed or not?
Langley, you have the answer to that.
The actual success, I mean, because if we are to look at Facebook, the president will fall.
Twitter.
On Twitter and Facebook.
I
But
think
I don't know. I don't know.
yeah, this is what I also have observed, no. May pattern na sila nga, I don't know which political parties are responsible. It's too early to speculate. Pero there are already memes coming out na history is repeating itself daw. So ABS shut down. There's a
widow.
dictator, and then there's the widow. But we also we also knew what happened after the widow took over. The widow, actually, when we're talking of Cory, she was well-meaning. She was put on the limelight because her husband, the number one critic of Marcos, was assassinated. Pero lain ang temper sang sadto nga times sa subong eh. And then the second thing is we already know what will happen to a widow without any political may political na event pa siya bala. She was manipulated by her more political savvy nga mga
family niya.
Oo, ang sa advisors niya. So, ang oligarchy nga gintapol ni Marcos, nagbalik during her time. And then there were the same human rights violations, the same issues on press freedom.
The same institutional framework, if I may add,
that were existing during martial law. Unfortunately, netabo man sa sa time ni Cory. So, we know what happened. And I think, I agree with...
Ang title ta The Newsroom Huddle, pero dugalapit na kita kalapit kasi wala na ta social distancing. Bala na.
Huddle. Ganyan.
Huddle.
I think I would agree with what Slavoj Zizek mentioned, no? Which is why he posed a very important question. Why is it that people like Duterte, for example, in the Philippines, Putin in Russia, and Trump in the US are rising in power? It's because of the failure of the alternative narratives. Sang left.
I think.
That's the voice Zizek, by the way. That's how he speaks. Yeah. The people power one succeeded because people were disillusioned by, I think, no.
They were pissed and the economy was tanking.
The economy was sinking from 1 to 2 ang dollar, nag 1 to 16. Grabing utang sa Pilipinas. And then gin-present ang alternative, si Cory. But when the alternative was presented,
Bao, Diyos ko.
wala mang gimerti apon nagkatabo. So, it's going to be a vicious cycle, I think. Kung mag-succeed man gid, and we're not going to learn anything from the past, it's really going to be a vicious cycle, and dictators will keep on
I
popping
think
up
that's
every
the
now and then.
hard thing about this whole narrative. Is because people who support Duterte actually have, kung sa common malang mga people, they actually have a reason why they support Duterte because they suffered from the alternative. And the same ones nga wala ga support kay Duterte is because they suffered from his leadership man. Kag amo ni sa ang duwa ni ka perspectives nga kailangan ta makita bla when determining bla what is ano ang pinaka-helpful nga common ground nga pwede ta kay both sides are actually justified because both sides have actually suffered from the other. Kamo na siya. So muna sa actually ang question.
May kanta si Bambuda eh. Hindi pula't dilaw, tunay na magkalaban.
Yan yung buklod na actually.
It was originally buklod. And I actually met the composer, si Rom Donggeto, when I was working in Panawag sa Impansin, in Manila. Manila. But seriously, it was actually Rom Donggeto who composed the song and sung by Noel Cabangon, who became President Aquino's favorite songwriter. Anyhow.
Singer-songwriter.
Now, interesting point, Doc Austin, because to me, it seems that our story is actually like Provinciano or all the telenovelas on ABS-CBN. Why? Because we tend to look at issues like a telenovela. There's the traidor and there's the artista. There's nothing in between. We don't even understand kundi intadira. What's in it for me as a citizen? It's like in Negros, actually. In Negros, if you talk about politics, are you actually looking for a good leader? Or are you looking for the best amo? Diba? It's like in the hacienda. The amo gives me good sweldo, gives me beneficio, tends to my needs when I'm sick, and gives me a coffin when my relatives die. So I think that's the nuancing of the Pinoy. It's the nuancing of the artista and the traidor. I don't know if it's happening now still.
If going back to the
Interesting
point of Doc, wherein you have these two conflicting interests who are completely alienated from one another, that's actually a very interesting point because since the time of the Third Republic, from 1946 when the Philippines achieved its sovereignty onward, we have always been a presidential democracy. And in that presidential democracy, a lot of attention, a lot of power, a lot of authority is given to the president. And so when one party goes into Malacanang and then the other ones step out, the other ones, especially under our 1987 constitution, their interests would not be very well represented because Congress would be in lockstep behind the president with all the incentives there. Ang Senate it's basically 24 independent republics. So where does the opposition go? Where does the opposition go? I mean, if just to provide a clear example, some of the most democratic countries in the world today, you name them, Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, Australia, what characterizes them is this consensus-based parliamentary system, wherein even if the opposition loses the election, you are still guaranteed seats there in the legislature, and from there, you can scrutinize and check on the government and hold them accountable, which is something gravely lacking sa Philippines subong. So he raises a very interesting point about conflicting interests always getting pissed off in the alternation of regimes.
But if I am opposite you on the debate table, I would ask you, when was the last time that we had a parliamentary system?
The Malolos Republic.
After
The
that,
Malolos Constitution, we were given a parliamentary system by what they drafted in the late 1890s. Would you believe?
what about during
That was
Marcos?
the last time. During the time of Marcos, he subverted the 1973 Constitution, which was already supposed to be a parliamentary system, but in reality, it was a semi-presidential system akin to the French and Peruvian models. He subverted it with Executive Order Number 6. Kag ang Executive Order Number 6, amo pang nag-concentrate more power into his hands. It consolidated power into the hands of President Marcos. So in fact, that his Prime Minister, si Cesar Virata, who was related kay Emilio Aguinaldo, if I'm not mistaken, Malolos Republic, it's a beautiful timeline we live in. so much so that Mr. Virata became a sort of glorified executive secretary kay Marcos.
But
Look,
can
a
we then
figurehead.
conclude that the problem, do debate, no? Can we conclude therefore, my friend, that the problem is... Doon naglayin na ako ng intonation. You see. That the problem therefore is not the structure, but men.
What is interesting there is that think of it like an infinite loop, like the infinite symbol. The structure or the system creates the culture creates the system, and obviously if you have to change one variable, it's obviously going to change the other because these are reflexive variables. These are highly interrelated to one another, and we see that today and even in Philippine history happening over and over again.
And if ang system hindi gusto mag-change,
Mhm.
maguba ang loop tapos sa muna sa anarchy, chaos. Tapos gali eventually mabalik mo na Japan.
All right, but we're not talking about chaos theory.
Interesting.
Interesting. All right, but let's go back to the news.
Yes, the news.
And so, 2 weeks ago, one of the top stories was Danding Coangco died. I don't know if this is a fitting footnote to our discussion now. Danding Coangco was 85 when he died, and there was no outpouring of support. At least, we haven't seen any. Nga ang publiko linya sa dalan, nagahibi, as usually happens in Negros Occidental when a great political figure dies. Si Rio Diaz Coangco, ang asawa sang iya bata nga si Charlie Coangco, if you can remember, pagkapatay, naglinya pang tao sa Pontevedra. Kaya nagibi. Danding Coangco, except for the half-mast at the San Miguel Corporation offices, I haven't, of course, there was outpouring of praises from politicians, many of whom he has helped. Pero do wala eh. I don't know if people even remember who Danding Coangco is. Nag-i-post ka mo?
About that, you could possibly trace this to the fact that he was more of like because he did not come from here. He's a Coangco. He's from Tarlac. It could be theorized that people viewed him as more of a political figure, as someone who was actually slightly more distant, someone who was hands off. Because if I can recall correctly, he did not hold any elective position here in Negros.
No.
Am I right?
No.
I think that, which to add a counterpoint, if you were a politician here in Negros, of course you'd have to create links with your people. You'd have to interact with your constituents. I think it's that lack of being elected and being accountable and being being attached to your constituents, especially there in the 4th district. I think that's what maybe made the response a whole lot more muted than the death of, because subdued, more than the death of si Rio.
But sa Tarlac, wala man nakakita nga there was actually a public grieving over the death of Danding. No?
Probably it's a combination of a lot of things. First of all, may pandemic.
Oh yes.
So, syempre, the outpouring of support is mostly
Public grief would be more muted.
Yeah, a lot more muted. Hindi na pwede maka-mass gathering. And then second would be, of course, I don't know, there's a palpable fear subong because of the ATL or the anti-terror law. And then, sa mga young people, guro subong, if Danding had not died and Danding did not make it to the news, they might think that Danding is like the Loch Ness Monster. Do ka mythic figure lang siya. Do ka mythological figure.
Aral lang siya.
Aral lang siya. I don't know if he exists or not because we have heard of Danding, SMC, but he has not been active for a long time.
And this jingle actually in the past when he ran for president was Ambot kung galing kay gagmay pa mo to siguro. Ako gamay
I
pa man.
wasn't even alive at that
1998.
time.
Gamay pa man ko to.
1992, I think.
Ang kanta ito, danding, danding, kailangan natin. Danding, danding, kailangan natin. Danding kuwang ko, pag-asa ng bayan. Something like that, no? I might be off-key by a few octaves, pero, you know.
Yeah,
But eventually, the song became danding, danding, kailangan natin. Damo na nagpolitiko, plapit siya mo. Saan ang punta? Funding ni danding, kailangan ng bayan. I think he was condemned to that image. That he
Yes.
was but a kingmaker.
Yes.
But he never became king. At least formally. But he was king in his own right. Di ba?
Oh, yes.
So I think that's the enigma of Danding.
I think sa Negros, he was the only one nga from Negros nga naka-make sa top 5 Forbes list sa Philippines. I think he's the only one nga halin diri sa Negros Occidental. Pero like I've said, the younger people would have a very vague na sino ni si Danding man, ano ni siya man. And what they already know is kung ano ginsugid sa ila nga crony siya ni Marcos. And then, even if you're going to go back to how mainstream media covered him during his death, it's always ambassador do kung Danding, crony ni Marcos. So yung image niya is inexorably linked to the Marcoses. And then he's a political kingmaker nga out of power naman subong.
And you know what's ironic about this? The ones keeping him alive, at least his memory alive, are his most bitter foes, the Communist Party of the Philippines. You know why? Sa assessments and history documents, sa historical documents, sang partido is always being referred to as one of the verdugos of Marcos. And ginasugpon ng apelyido kung sino ang presidente, Estrada Cuangco Click. Kung sino ang gobernador, Coscolluela Cuangco Click. Marañon Cuangco Click. Sa Negros may apelyido, Click mo. Todd.
Click.
Click, by the way, is C-L-I-Q-U-E. Abe, spell niyo ba? So it's always the Click. And Cuangco was the prefix. Anyhow. So what do you think of the week's developments?
With regard to Cuangco,
Everything.
COVID, Danding.
Please, be my guest.
For COVID, the usual the cases are increasing. There were record-breaking new cases that were broken again the next few days. And I'm not supposed to be laughing, pero it's a kind of humorous be how our national health authorities and politicians seemingly downplay the pandemic as usual. I think one of the reasons why they try their best to I know it's not supposed to be ideal, blanga they try to keep downplaying the pandemic by using this nomenclature nga bago, like new cases, fresh cases, late cases, and then the delayed counting, and then gulpi na lang diyon when the
Backlogs gali. May backlogs.
backlogs, and then when they report, they don't report the positive cases, they only report the confirmed cases. The positive cases, I think, are more than 60,000 na more than 70,000 na I think subong ang positive cases, in which they say nga we need to confirm because there may be duplications. And kung sa akon lang kung miyara man gid be duplications with how the laboratories work blah nang there must be the number of duplications must be hindi mo na bla ang fault bla of having duplications hindi mo na kataas. So if there are 70,000 positive cases but ang 1,000 man lang ang duplications, 69,000 ang positive cases gidya. So hindi mo na mapanubo gidya as in. So ang ako nga observation is ang ginahimo sa aton nga national government is they are trying to alleviate kuno the fears of the public by trying to make us understand that these cases are amo lang ni kadjutay or amo lang ni kadamo, hindi dapat mag-abala kay amo ni late ni sila, okay lang, wala kaso late niya refresh. Kaya until now I actually don't understand what's the reason behind late and fresh cases. I mean, they are still positive cases anyway. Kamo na. And I have I have my own contemporaries man in research who are also following the graphs and the cases. They are seeing discrepancies man in the graphs. They're seeing there are cases not counted. There are dead people who are then counted as alive the next day. Mga mga bagay which should be fixed. Ideally should really be fixed as soon as possible. Kaya the only way nga ang policies ang aton nga national government will be sound man and will be appropriate is if ang data man mismo nila is correct man. Kay if hindi nila pag-i-fix ang data, syempre na lang gid makanugon malang sang ila man mismo nga effort sa pagano. Okay, what we are actually doing here, trying to interpret the data that they come out. Actually, hindi naman na dapat aton nga obra mo, but we are trying to do it kay kita mismo nabudlayan ta mag-intindi kisa asang ila nga data nga ginapagwa, anong meaning sini, anong meanings na, when actually sila na dapat ang provide para sa aton. Pero anyway, wala ta dami mihimo. We have to also do our parts man bala in So far amo malani, it's just alarming ang recent nga mga counts ni nga mayara ta new cases nga tag 2,000 ang 2,000 ang deaths ta sobra 100, although recoveries ta dako man, pero amo na siya. I think amo lang ako nga with regard to the COVID pandemic.
And in relation to your points on correction, what we're seeing right now, this whole news cycle, is actually the greatest representation of democratic and institutional deficits in the Republic of the Philippines and in the province of Negros Occidental. And what is really happening right now is an indication, is a grave indicator that something needs to be corrected. Something needs to be reformed. And it is now up to us as citizens of the Republic, as Filipinos, as Negrenses, to read, to look for solutions, good solutions, best practices, and whatever noble things that we need to make the best of the situation, we need to look for them. We need to talk about them, we need to clamor for them, and we need to hold our government accountable as to make sure that these crises, that this crazy news cycle, in fact, will one day come to an end.
Okay. I think in whatever issue man whether it's Donding or the COVID or the ABS-CBN closure, ang pinaka-importante diri siguro is to always look at everything, including the gray areas, and not let just swing from one extreme to another. Let's not just look at the death counts, for example. Let's not just look at the rising cases, but let's also look at the recoveries. Let's also look at efforts man nga not just by government but by other institutions man para nga ma-flatten gid ang curve. Okay? And sa case naman niya sang ABS-CBN, then let's make this as let's look at this as from a bigger point of view and not just look at the two opposite narratives, but also look at kung sino ang naman ang natungan. The same with Danding and his contributions. We vilify him, but we also, subong ko lang na-realize, in all issues, we will also have to look at everything from a bigger point of view, not just sa walang ka-extreme.
And you have seen our views about the big news. Tell us what you think. This has been the Newsroom Huddle. I'm Julius Maraveles.
I'm Hannah Papasin.
I'm Gabby Lacson.
Austin Salameda.
Till next time, good day.